Mr. Fisher will be sitting here. The van will stop in front of him at 4:30. A minute later, the guard will appear around this corner, and you, Pendlebury, will detain him for at least half a minute. Ask him for a light, ask him the way, ask him anything, but keep him there. We must have those 30 seconds.
Edgar.
I beg your pardon?
Isn't one supposed to say that when one's being briefed on my rare visits to the kinema?
The word is Roger.
Oh, Roger. I'm silly old man.
To continue.
This is Criteria.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Miras, back on another episode of Criteria. I'm here with James Mayevsky. Hello, James.
Hello, good to be here.
And we're here with a guest today, Paul Laudiero. Paul is an author, an actor, and a screenwriter. As both actor and writer, he created the IFC series If I Was in It, and he co-wrote the film Escape from the North Pole, which was featured on the Blacklist, which is a prestigious list of best unproduced screenplays. And he's an old friend of ours. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you, Thomas. Hey, guys. So happy to be here.
Yeah, Paul, we're glad to have you talking about this movie with us. We're talking about the Lavender Hill Mob today because you're our resident funny man.
Yeah.
Funny man Paul Laudiero is what we call you.
All right. They hate it when you say that.
What?
They don't like to be called funny men.
Who doesn't?
The comedians. We don't like funny men. We
Oh,
prefer
so
comedian.
you're a comedian
yeah.
now.
Well, I was
I
a
thought
comedian.
maybe you didn't want to be called a comedian either.
For 5 minutes before this podcast started, I said, "Don't call me a comedian." So
Yeah,
he
so
called me
after
a funny
years on the comedy circuit, performing improv and stand-up and writing goofy little things.
Yep.
Paul's now finishing law school, recently married. You just had your first child,
Yes.
boy.
Baby boy, Louis.
Yeah. So lots of beautiful things happening here in your life, building up Catholic culture. This is a good Catholic man, too, that we're talking with.
Thank you.
But yeah, thanks for being here. We're talking about the Lavender Hill Mob. What do you got, Thomas?
Well, this movie came out in 1951. It's a product of Ealing Studios, which is this British comedy studio, basically, that made a lot of beloved films around this time period. A number of them starring Alec Guinness, as does this film. Films like The Lady Killers, which was later remade by the Coen brothers. Another big one, perhaps even more notable than this one with Alec Guinness, is Kind Hearts and Coronets, in which he plays 8 different characters, all of which are murdered. I don't know if this is the only comedy on the Vatican Film List. It might be the only straight comedy. I mean, you could say Babette's Feast, for example, is a comedy. This is certainly, I would guess, the most like pure entertainment film on the list, and not having seen all of them.
This is sort of an everyman's Ocean's 11. That's how I like to look at it. It's Ocean's 11, but with poor, regular-looking men, I think.
Yeah, so the premise is Alec Guinness, I don't know how old he was at the time, but he seems obviously younger than in Star Wars.
He could be 30 or 80 years old. There's no way to tell. He's just a timeless gentleman.
He's this like creepy little dweeb who works for a bank, and he is in charge of like ensuring the safe transport of the gold bullion every day or every week or whatever. And he has been nurturing this secret dream of eventually ripping off this bank, and he's been waiting for the right partner to come around because he can't do it on his own. And so that's basically the premise of the film. Is it's a heist comedy with Alec Guinness as the protagonist, and there's like a little squad of people that he assembles to help him out.
Right, which maybe gives us a hint as to why this film ended up on the Vatican Film List as opposed to some other rip-roaring, hilarious Alec Guinness funny man movies.
I could be wrong in saying this is the only like straight comedy on the list, because I'd have to double check, but maybe they were just looking for a comedy. It's still, even if they were just looking for a comedy, it's still kind of an odd choice.
It won Best Screenplay, though. It won the Oscar for Best Screenplay, so it's not like it was a random comedy,
So this is a movie that is considered like somewhat of a classic, but it's just interesting that it's on the list next to like, all-time great films of the type that are on there. You could probably think of, again, not to sneeze at this film, but you could think of other comedies like, I don't know, some like Frank Capra movies or whatever that you would think might be, even more classic or influential.
Dumb and Dumber.
My point was that, Dumb and Dumber.
Flubber.
My point was that this is a genre piece. I feel like genre films are represented on the Vatican Film List. We've already watched Stagecoach or 2001. This is a heist movie, so it contains a lot of the tropes that one would expect from a heist film, although kind of recast in this charming proletarian kind of way.
Right. Yeah, it's very well written.
When is the Vatican Film List from? When was it published?
95.
Okay, so Ocean's 11 wasn't out yet, because I'm picturing if Ocean's 11 had come out, this would not.
No.
Well, the original Ocean's 11 would have been out with Frank Sinatra, and is Frank Sinatra in Ocean's 11?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And they chose
the Rat Pack.
They decided to pass on that and went with this movie, which is so interesting. Because I feel like Ocean's 11 is just the best version of this. It's funny. It's charming.
Crime doesn't pay in this one, even though it sort of does.
No, but it doesn't. And that is important.
That's the difference.
That is important.
In Ocean's 11, they get away with it. In this movie, spoilers.
Have you seen the original Ocean's 11?
I did when I was a kid. I saw it, yeah.
When I was thinking about this, rewatching the film, and at some point in this conversation, we will get into the conversation about like what purpose does a heist movie serve? Is this like a legitimate form of entertainment? But, I couldn't help but think about the ending to Ocean's 11 because I rewatched it for the first time in a long time recently.
The new one.
And I was thinking about the scene when they're all at the fountain.
Yeah.
It's a great scene. And Claire de Lune is playing and they're all like, dreaming about what we're going to do with our money.
Yeah.
It's a great scene, but you're kind of thinking, is this right?
Yeah.
We can get into that. But yeah, it's an interesting choice. But I think as far as heist movies go, the fact that the guy is caught in the end is probably one reason that this was chosen.
Right.
Stephen Gradanis, in his article on the Vatican Film List, also talks about how Kind Hearts and Coronets, another Ealing Studios picture with Alec Guinness, is probably considered even a little bit more of a classic than this one is. But he said that these are both dark comedies, but it's considerably darker, dealing with, serial murder and a higher degree of like envy and jealousy and hatred. That one's about this guy who his mother was a disowned member of this noble family, basically. And or at least she's always told him that she was part of this noble family that broke off contact with her. And so he's filled with resentment growing up poor of this inheritance he thinks should be his. So he kills off 8 family members, all of whom are played by Alec Guinness, including like an Anglican priest, an old lady, a naval commander. And
is Alec Guinness also, is he the one killing them off?
No, I forget who plays the murderer, but Alec Guinness plays all 8 of the family members. And it just shows you how, in fact, originally in this, when they were picking him for the role, it was going to be 4. And he was like, as long as we're going to do this, why don't we just make it 8? Why don't we double it? And they were like,
amazing.
Okay. So it just shows you his range. It's probably worth talking about Alec Guinness a little bit
it's
here.
Called pulling a Guinness, right?
Yeah, well, this is actually another reason why it's fortuitous that we're speaking with Paul, because I'm pretty sure, Paul, that you gave me my first copy of Blessings in Disguise, Alec Guinness's...
One of 3 memoirs written by Alec Guinness. I have that too. I've read about half of it.
Did you not?
I don't think so. I gave you that book on acting by that weird Russian guy.
You didn't give me Blessings in Disguise?
I wasn't, unfortunately, not me.
Have you read it?
I haven't, but now I will.
Well, Blessings in Disguise, it's very he's a very funny guy.
I gave you the book, so I have to read it.
He's very funny, he's very witty, and in that book he tells us, probably, some of the people listening know this, but it's worth mentioning, he was a convert to Catholicism.
Yes.
And in that book he tells the story. He was actually playing, it was a movie or a series, I think it was a film of Father Brown, this series of detective stories written by G.K. Chesterton.
About a priest detective.
Yeah, about a priest detective who solves mysteries unlike Sherlock Holmes with his like technical insight and genius. He solves it with his insight into the heart of man. And Alec Guinness was playing Father Brown, and they were filming in France. And he tells this story about, I actually wish I had it in front of me to just read it because he's a great writer. Basically, it was after filming, he was walking through this little French town, and this little French boy came up to him, and he was still dressed in his clerical garb. And this little French boy came up to him and just took his hand and walked along with him and chatted happily to him in French for a while, just assuming he was a priest. And he was so moved by this like instinctive trust that this little boy had for him as a priest that it like started him on his journey to become a Catholic.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Also worth mentioning that Guinness was attracted to men, but he got married and had kids and
Is that in the book?
lived a life
I've never heard that.
I don't think it's in the book, but I think it's like established that it was the case. But he lived this life with his wife and his kids.
I remember reading an excerpt of a letter of his that was featured in Magnificat one year. Maybe it was during the Year of Faith, when he was basically just writing about his relationship to the Eucharist as a convert, and growing in an appreciation for and then devotion to our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament.
That's great. Yeah. And, people have had some negative things to say about his personality or his treatment of people as well. But, it just sounds to me like this was a guy who was struggling to become a better person and, could have ended up a lot worse than he did.
I've just read articles about how much he hated being on the set of Star Wars. And I loved
it's
his
funny
stories.
to watch. I recently went on YouTube and watched a bunch of old TV interviews of Alec Guinness around the time of Star Wars, where people were asking him. It was actually like a medley of clips of different actors from the original Star Wars talking about how bad the dialogue was and how they made George Lucas change certain lines or refused to say them. And he was one of the people talking about how bad the dialogue was when he was reading the script, but he just couldn't stop turning the pages anyway. And he was very surprised by the fact that this made him so famous and made him so much money.
Wow.
But he was always a little bemused by it because, he thought it was an exciting film, but he didn't.
It was no Lavender Hill Mob, I'll tell you that.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
Lavender Hill Mob, I think, is Alec Guinness's highest grossing film in the United States, in which he was the lead
prior to Star Wars
role.
Well,
he's not a lead.
in which he was the lead. Yeah, I gotcha. He's obviously very versatile. He was a theater actor, did a lot of work with some of the greatest English theater actors of all time. But, he's also in Lawrence of Arabia, I believe, which I haven't seen. But he was also in The Bridge on the River Kwai. So, done a number of notable film roles.
He was in Dr. Zhivago, I think.
That sounds right.
Yeah, so perhaps, his being a Catholic convert, a prominent Catholic actor helps the inclusion of this film on the Vatican Film List.
You never know.
Yeah, but by all accounts, this is a good movie. It is a well-made movie, well-written, well-acted, excellently shot. I think there's a lot of really exciting things that are done with the camera in this film. But I also appreciate that the Vatican Film List, doesn't shy away from including a more populist or entertaining film. It doesn't have to be some sort of elitist.
Maybe they just wanted to have an example of a good film. You know what I mean? It's a good movie.
Yeah. I enjoyed watching it, and I wanted to watch it a second time, which is not what I can say about some of the films on this list.
That we've already done.
Yeah, well, in the sense that all of them I've wanted to watch a second time, but with a more academic interest. I don't finish 2001: A Space Odyssey and go, oh man, can't wait to watch that one again. But this one was a lot of fun both times I watched it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's a very funny movie.
It's funny in a way that I had to sort of be initiated into.
Right. Yeah. I couldn't tell if it was if people were being funny or if it was just old fashioned.
Yeah, I definitely.
There were certain moments where I was I can't tell if it's a gag or this movie is just 100 years old.
I found it a lot more funny the second time I watched it, but I think that was because
I suspected that you would, because you seemed a little bit indifferent.
I loved it.
The first time you watched it, you seemed a little indifferent. You were there were some funny parts.
Yeah, I loved it the second time I watched it. I liked it the first time I watched it too, but
James wanted to front load our podcast with some of the most important, well-known films, for understandable reasons, and that's mostly what we've been doing.
Thomas just wanted to have fun.
I wanted to have Paul on, and I thought this would be a great one to discuss with him. That's a big part of it as well.
Paul can't discuss the more highbrow films.
No.
Well, Paul's a screenwriter. Well, what are we going to talk about?
Paul's a sweet kid, but he doesn't follow.
What are we going to talk about with this film? A lot of it's going to be the writing, and Paul's a screenwriter, so and has a background in comedy, so I figured not to put too much pressure on him, but I figured,
Well, what do you have to say for yourself, Paul?
I had to watch the movie with subtitles because their accents were too hard to follow.
Me too. I watched it with subtitles. I watch a lot of things with subtitles.
I watch a lot of movies with subtitles. Yeah. Aside from just one last thing about Alec Guinness, he carries the movie.
Yeah.
He's so fun to watch.
Yeah.
There's a moment in the beginning of the movie where he gets a gun and he looks at it and giggles. And he carries.
He's really good at bugging his eyes out.
Yes.
In this greedy little way.
In the same way, nowadays this is maybe a poor comparison, but The same way someone would see The Hangover and be like, Zach Galifianakis carries, like, anytime he's on screen, you're watching Zach Galifianakis. This is a poor comparison. But it's the same thing with this, where everyone was funny, but every time Alec Guinness is on the screen, I'm watching him. Everything he does is funny. His reactions to things.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it seems to me like to be a very intentional comedy. Like, it's not ill thought or sort of happening just on the surface. Like, Alec Guinness's character, for example, is, really funny and a real character, but also fully realized. You get the sense that this is a real person and not just some sort of like comedic archetype or something.
Sure. Yeah. And I think the other characters do function more on the level of personalities, right? Like, definitely there's some good comedic acting from all of them, in particular his main sidekick, Pendlebury. The other two guys who are the career criminals just function more as personalities, and they're great. I'm sure that these guys probably were very recognizable British actors of the day. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Alec Guinness is the guy who's really playing all the angles and like the most kind of active thinking, on his face.
And there's
character.
Real detail, in his performance. Like you said, Paul, just his response to being handed the gun.
Especially the second time.
Yeah. Not everyone can just widen their eyes and smile, and it's funny. And Alec Guinness does that, and it's absolutely hilarious. Right. It's so weird. He's such a dweeb. This is like a nerd fantasy movie. This is where a nerd watches the movie and goes, "Oh yeah, this is me. I'm gonna rob."
He's
my
really
bank.
good at portraying like covetousness and like
that's exactly
in a comical way on his face.
He's watching gold being poured, and you can almost see the money signs dancing in his eyes.
Right, that's so. That's such a great way of saying.
He's like Wile E. Coyote almost.
He bugs out his eyes. He has
like
this little smile,
lips almost.
Yeah,
but like not in a way that's. I mean, it is slightly cartoonish, but it's still it's a fully realized character. It's not some. It's not some caricature.
Yeah. You know what? What's also interesting about this character, do we know his name? The name of the character that he's playing?
His name is Henry Holland.
Holland, that's it.
Holland, yeah.
And what's his nickname?
Dutch. Later, towards the end of the film.
You can call me Dutch.
Which is great, which is very cool. He wants to be cool. He's read all these crime novels with his this old lady in the apartment building he lives in.
Yes.
Who's hilarious.
This is Holland. Holland goes to work every day. He brings a ham and cheese sandwich. I have nothing against ham and cheese sandwiches, but he gets to work on time. He acts all prim and proper.
He's merely a non-entity, as he says.
He's like Walter White.
He's like Walter White before he breaks bad.
Yeah.
And then he goes home, and instead of, kicking back, calling up some single ladies, he literally sits down with an old woman and reads her a detective novel every night. And it's delightful, but it's also so informative of who he is.
Yeah,
he's a fly on the wall. He's just a guy,
Yeah.
He's a little man, and we have nothing wrong with that. I watched those scenes and I was like, he's such a nice guy. But in his head, I think he was slighted by the world.
I think that this actually speaks to another reason why I think that this film is included on the Vatican Film List, is that there's this line early on where he says, most men who long to be rich know inwardly that they will never achieve their ambition. And I think that this line specifically is sort of gestures toward this characteristically modern despair of being rich. We live in this really affluent, Western Europe and the United States in the 20th century achieved a level of affluence that is just sort of unprecedented. And at the same time, there are these legions of, quote, merely non-entities, as Dutch describes them in the film, wage earners who are going to work. We get this shot a couple of times of just hundreds of people pouring across this bridge, commuting into London. And so I think that kind of at the beating heart of this film is an awareness of this emptiness that sort of lurks behind a consumeristic, materialistic, affluent culture that can only be filled by God, and when it's not, drives people to doing terrible things in resentment. Even the supporting character, the artist, who's kind of a failed artist, he's clearly very good. He has a lot of knowledge. He's always quoting, poetry or Shakespeare, but he, in his own admission, propagates British cultural depravity. He makes for money, these kitschy little tourist sculptures to be shipped out to different places in the world so that British tourists, when they're abroad, can buy them and bring them back home,
Yeah.
So even in that character, there's this failed sense, this kind of despair that really drives both of them to do what they do.
At least that guy makes things, but Holland is like, what people of a certain philosophy would call a wage slave.
Yeah.
And you don't get the sense that, well, if he were more ambitious, he probably, in his job, he could probably move up the ranks, as is indicated. But, on his current salary, you don't expect that even if he had a family, he could really support them. But yeah, he's an interesting character because he obviously has the ambition and some degree of cleverness to pull this thing off. And yet you think, well, why didn't he just apply that to
his job?
Why didn't he apply that to like making something of himself in the world?
Yeah.
And it seems like just because he had this dream of being rich.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And he didn't really want anything else for himself.
I think that there are a lot of people, sadly enough, for whom that is the only dream that's available to them. I think about that. I'm thinking about it increasingly now when we see the kind of social disturbance that we're seeing, kind of asking the question for how many of these individuals who are out there rioting or looting or burning things, is there this kind of despair of recognizing inwardly that I will never achieve this ambition of being rich?
Sure. Whereas a number of them actually are super rich.
Yeah. But that's also the paradox, is that like you cannot ever be rich enough, so this is also a particular despair that's born of an affluent culture, I think.
Right. Right.
So it's almost like in proportion to your affluence and your wealth is this emptiness.
Yeah, if I didn't have God, I'd be robbing banks left and right. 100%. 100%.
I think it's significant that he's not married, he doesn't have a family. He doesn't seem to have many friends.
He's a man devoted to his job.
Mm-hmm.
He's a loser.
He's a dweeb. I like dweeb. Something I realized after watching this movie is how much cooler British people are when they're committing crimes. Just straight up. Like, I got Guy Ritchie vibes from every scene with the two career criminals.
Yeah.
There's a scene in the movie where the two goody two-shoes are trying to find career criminals to help them commit the crime. So they basically for days and days and days talk on public transit about how there's a safe in their complex and how easy it is to rob. And then they wait for criminals to come. And then you meet these two career criminals whose names are what? Shorty something.
I don't remember names of characters.
I don't remember, especially because their Cockney accents are like so thick. I never really understood what they were saying.
Anyway, we meet these two career criminals, and within 10 seconds of them talking, I'm like, these guys are cooler than anyone.
And they're like pals immediately.
And they know each other. And one of the guys, Alec Guinness, doesn't believe that he's a criminal, and he pulls out newspaper clippings of his own crimes that he's committed and shows them
That's
to him.
Hilarious.
I was like, everything they're saying, the accent, everything about it, it's just way cooler than some American being
even one of them, I guess it's the shorter of the two.
His name is Shorty.
Yeah, Shorty. When he first comes in, he tries to play it like he's never done this before and he's just some normal guy. But then as soon as he recognizes that he can let that mask down and like be the cool criminal that he is, it's like a 180 turn.
He's the coolest guy in the room.
He's lighting a cigarette off of
a burner.
Yeah. Way cooler than Italian criminals.
100%. And as an Italian, I can testify to that.
Mobs are cooler than mafias.
If this is the Lavender Hill Mafia, we would not be covering this. Would not be picked
for
the Vatican Film.
This would be on Crisis Magazine instead of Criteria.
They're just cooler. Everything they do is funnier. I think it's a little bit of a crutch, to be honest. I think the accent thing is a bit of a crutch because I immediately had respect for them, even though these are petty criminals. I thought they were, cultured men.
What?
Yeah. And
that's what you get from Cockney?
As soon as I hear Cockney, I'm like, these guys have traveled the world and are well-read. That's what I think.
Patience is a virtue. Shakespeare.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think that's actually a Shakespeare quote.
Yeah.
No,
I believe it.
It's not.
I'd believe it.
You know who leans on this as a crutch, though? Steven Soderbergh. He likes to have Cockney slang and explain it multiple times during the movie. I forget if this is in Ocean's 11 or something else that I saw by him.
It's in one of the Ocean's movies,
but he will have multiple times in the movie somebody use British Cockney rhyming slang, and then it is explained immediately after.
So even in Ocean's 11 with Don Cheadle, he's just the coolest guy.
So, Thomas, you mentioned that you wanted to talk about heist movies in principle.
Yeah, but do you want to hear Cockney slang number 1?
Yes.
First?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is this like Mambo number 5?
Yeah.
Cockney slang 5.
There's a number of Cockney slang expressions used mainly by, I guess it's Shorty. He's the one who uses it most. When speaking, the first one I'll mention is when speaking of the fact that he normally works by himself, he says, I've been on me Jack Jones since whatever. I intuited that. So this is the way that Cockney rhyming slang, this is like a 19th century development somehow in Cockney culture, that basically like it's this very indirect form of slang because it usually involves a word that rhymes with a word, but you don't even say the word that rhymes. You say like a word that's associated with the word that rhymes. So one of the other ones he uses is, which I've heard before, is China, which means mate because of China plate. So
That's
it rhymes.
amazing.
So it rhymes with plate, but he doesn't say plate for mate. He says China.
So I've been on me Jack Jones.
That actually means being
Alone
or on your own.
Because Jones rhymes with alone?
No. So there's a website called Hidden London that I'm looking at. It says it appears to derive from a music hall song, "E da know where we are." E apostrophe E,
Like
da know where apostrophe E are. Written in the early 1890s and by Fred Epplett and made famous by Gus Ellen. The lyric concerns one Jack Jones, a former Covent Garden market porter who has come into some money and now considers himself above his old workmates. He reads the Telegraph instead of the Star, calls his mother Ma instead of Mother, and stands alone at the bar drinking scotch and soda. It says that modern usage rarely indicates aloofness. It now tends to refer to someone who feels abandoned. But there is a quote at the bottom here from a 2008 song by Dizzy Rascal featuring Calvin Harris and Chrome called Dance With Me. And why you all over there on your Jack Jones? You need to let me get behind your backbone.
What?
Wow.
So that's all for now.
Well, it's funny because actually accents operate pretty centrally in the plot of this film because it's the artist who instructs the person who sells his souvenirs in Paris not to sell the crates marked R, but because he's British, he says, don't sell the crates marked Ah. And then, of course, in French, Ah is not R. It's
they say it's like
A.
air or something.
Yeah. So she misunderstands and she says, okay, I won't sell the crates marked A. So that creates a whole problem.
But British people believe French people are stupid. This is correct, right? People.
I never heard this.
I think the British people don't like French people. Right?
I think
Isn't
the
that
British
a
people
trope?
think most people are stupid.
That's true, but I think there's like an animosity between the British and the French.
Okay, yes.
I'm not making
that.
this
No,
up,
no.
right?
That makes sense because they're right across the channel from each other. There's like all sorts of wars.
I think there's a history of this.
Yeah, the Normandy.
Much like how the whole world
Norman invasion
dislikes Italians, I think British people dislike French people immensely.
Yeah, definitely.
And I picked up, as soon as I saw that they were going to France, I said, oh, a Frenchman is going to mess this up. Definitely.
Well, it was not her fault. It was
the British guy's fault.
Yeah, because he didn't specify. But it's because of the way he talked. It was because of his accent. What's also interesting is that Alec Guinness's character has a bit of a lisp. He has like kind of a speech impediment where he doesn't pronounce his R's
At all. They're gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out, is this like a type of British accent or like what's going on?
No, I think it's a choice. He's
got an Elmer Fudd syndrome.
What a weird choice.
Yeah, but I think it kind of contributes to the sense of his being
A dweeb?
well, but also kind of
A dweeb?
Endearing?
yeah. There's like he's unassuming. You would never assume that someone.
It's pronounced dreeb. Dreeb.
Dreeb?
Yeah, dreeb.
Why?
Not dweeb. That's how Alec Guinness would pronounce it.
Okay.
It's dreeb.
It's dreeb. It was endearing. He does sound. That's exactly what it is. It's an Elmer Fudd syndrome.
Yeah.
Alec
Slightly
Guinness's
more, not
character-
as exaggerated, but like,
Right.
yeah.
So much so that I looked up Alec Guinness interviews afterwards to see if he could
No,
say
he doesn't.
R or not.
Yeah,
And then I remembered in Star Wars he says R all the time.
yeah.
Luke Skywalker. He says walker, not walker. Right?
Yeah,
I don't think he says Luke Skywalker.
Darth Vader. He pronounces the R's.
Does he say Darth Vader?
Okay, but he doesn't have a speech impediment.
It's more easily detectable at the beginning of a word than at the end, because British people are more likely to do that at the end, but not at the beginning. We were going to talk about the heist aspect. This film, the writer T.E.B. Clarke was a former policeman, and when he was going to write about this topic, he asked the Bank of England for advice on how an employee might possibly steal £1 million worth of gold.
That is so British.
And they responded very enthusiastically and made an informal investigation, the results of which made their way into this film.
That is great. That is great.
That's great. You know what would be even better is if it was just a meta film about a screenwriter who wants to rip off a bank. So he comes up with an idea to film a movie about robbing a bank. And then he goes to the bank and asks them to tell him how would you best rob this bank. And then he actually executes it in the process of developing this film. That would be... But this kind of speaks to the sort of nonsense of heist movies, because you can definitely continue to like multiply these schemes outward, you know, in that way. They definitely follow a structure, a pretty reliable formula. You know, like half the film.
The plan is laid out in a nice montage.
You also have to like get
hatch
the crew,
idea, get the gang,
get the crew together.
Yeah.
You
know,
something always goes wrong.
Yeah,
someone's caught. But this movie, unlike modern heist movies, they don't get away with it. That's, you know.
But he seems pretty happy at the end anyway, even though he gets caught. He seems pretty like he like got his dream for a year.
Because he's a dweeb.
Yeah.
He's a dweeb.
Right.
Dweebs love that, you know?
Yeah. You know, granted, he doesn't get away with it, but this is something I've always wondered when I watch Ocean's 11 or whatever. Very enjoyable. Obviously, like the structure of a heist movie, it draws on a lot of enjoyable things that could also be employed in other contexts, like a spy film or something. Anytime there's something about like the technical, just like in a murder mystery, you can have it from the perspective of the criminal or from the perspective of the law. And there's a genre satisfaction from seeing all the details work out and stuff. So the, you know, there's aspects of which you can enjoy, which are perfectly legitimate, but yeah, this question of like, what are we endorsing when we sit down to watch a heist movie?
A good heist movie is like looking at a clock. It's like a functioning thing, except I don't think the heist movies can tell time, if that makes sense. So it's just something where all the puzzle pieces work together. But in reality, gentlemen thieves are not a thing. In reality, Danny Ocean does not exist, right? In reality, someone of that caliber of like thinking through things. I'll take this back a step. It's like when you watch mob movies, right? The Sopranos is an excellent example of like mob men are actually animals. They're murderers. They're evil, evil people. They're despicable. They're not cool to hang out with. They're terrifying to hang out with. The same way I think this movie accurately portrays thieves as either like poor cockney men who like are career criminals and not educated, and dweebs, as opposed to the Ocean's movies that it's like a play almost. It's like watching a clock of this invented sort of genre. It's Danny Ocean in real life would be a dirtbag. He's not someone who's suave or fun or wants to hang out with. He's either on Wall Street robbing people legally or a dirtbag heroin addict in prison. He's not this like cool, suave guy. I don't think those people exist in real life. If they have that level of brains, they're not doing that.
One thing that the heist film appeals to, which is much more questionable, is this fantasy of beating the system, getting one over, being a disadvantaged person all your life, and then pulling this thing off. You know, there may be some like resentment or there may not, but it's this vicarious thrill you get because everybody feels a little bit like, you know, what would I do with that money? Or, you know, if only I could do this to my boss, or, you know, those casinos steal from people anyway, or the banks steal from people anyway. So like, who cares kind of thing.
That's something every heist movie needs, is you need to be robbing from a bad guy. At least new heist movies do that to try to justify the criminals.
So Ocean's 11, you know, does this to some extent with the guy that they're robbing from. He stole the guy's wife. Yeah, he stole George Clooney's wife. He he's kind of a jerk, whatever, I forget. But
he's just a jerk.
It's the Robin Hood thing, steal from the rich to give to the poor.
Yeah.
But you're saying that you
but
think
at least Robin Hood is robbing from people who are like unjustly taxing peasants.
So you think that there may be something problematic in the vicarious pleasure that we derive watching other people rip off, institutions like the Bank of London?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that in this particular film, the vicarious aspect of it is as strong because the character is such a dweeb. It's more that you can understand his motivations. But in Ocean's 11 or something like that, it's like so cool. It's like so much cooler.
Yeah.
It's not just the fact that the scheme itself is interesting. It's that the whole thing is presented as like very cool and appealing.
I was thinking about that when I was watching this film because I was trying to pay attention to how the police were represented. There's been so much animosity leveled toward the police today. It's sort of woken me up to what I think has been kind of a cultural commonplace for decades now, to just have crooked cops in the movies and have, good guys working against the cops, we're rooting for the bad guys, and sort of wondering about to what extent that's informing the attitudes that people are having culturally, toward the police. In this film, the police are presented in a number of different lights. On the one hand, the detective who is investigating the case seems, by all accounts, to be, a really sort of stand-up guy. He's trusting, but he's diligent. We don't have any reason to dislike him. On the other hand, there are instances where there is a kind of on-screen dissonance between what we're told. There's one montage in particular that I'm thinking of, that it's sort of like the montage of the police investigating the crime and trying to track down these guys. And there's a voiceover talking about, everything that the police are doing in Scotland Yard. And there's a line that's like, they're continuing to work in calm and imperturbable harmony. A spirit of complete confidence prevails.
That sounds so British.
Yeah. But, but it also is, its sort of propagandish element is very obvious to us as the audience. Yeah. So it does seem to me like there's kind of a complicated relationship to law enforcement in this film, even if it's not portrayed outright as like the enemy.
My impression was that they are portrayed as public servants with varying degrees of competence.
Yeah.
Basically.
There's that one cop who rides along in the car singing Old MacDonald Had a Farm.
Yeah.
I think that was it's a funny moment. That was the only moment of comedy in the film that like rang a bit silly for me, was where the cars collide and the antennae. That's like the most cartoonish moment in the film.
Yeah.
When the antennae wrap around each other, and
running down the Eiffel Tower for 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's true.
That shot is amazing, though. I loved that shot. You like when they're running down the Eiffel Tower and the camera's doing all this crazy stuff going around them, and then there's these shots of their hats flying off or their coat, and they're like getting increasingly deranged. It's like this very surreal,
boyish
sequence. And when they come out at the bottom, actually, they're still spinning and laughing, and then the camera is like swiveling really violently, sort of mirroring this dizziness. To me, that's like a very visually exciting sequence, coupled with like the surreal characters of these impish children who have run off with the Eiffel Tower. Like they're laughing at them the whole time. It's almost like the children know what's at stake, and they're just mocking them.
And that would be your perception of kids in that situation. This is a trope sometimes in comical movies about criminals. A criminal trying to get a child to do something and trying to like pretend to be nice and getting increasingly frustrated as the child is just like goofing around and like not doing what they want.
Yeah.
Back to E-I-E-I-O though. I just wanted to point out, because it's this like distinctively British thing, when the policeman is singing along they're riding along in the car, and he's like, first of all, okay, I guess there was a time period when you would have heard E-I-E-I-O on the radio.
I know.
Which is hilarious.
Yeah.
Secondly, he says, we sing this at the choir down at the station, which is like, okay, there are police choirs. Tells you a lot about British culture right there, and like the British police culture.
Yeah.
They have a choir. Obviously, it's supposed to be funny that they sang E-I-E-I-O, Old MacDonald Had a Farm, but it's funny to us as Americans that there is a police choir.
Yeah.
The station that they spend their time.
Yeah.
It'd be like a cop softball league or something like that. It
Right.
wouldn't be
Right.
Yeah, just a quick comment on British cops. I think, and this might be still how they're portrayed in like modern, British crime shows. They are portrayed as civil servants versus I feel like in American cop shows, they're portrayed as like heroes. They're always like a hero.
Or villains.
Or villain. No, it's either
like,
a hero who's like, I gotta save the world, or absolute crook.
Yeah.
Horrific cop. In England, they're just regular good dudes, usually. Or bumbling dudes.
There's a scene where mercy is actually extended when the one street artist who thinks that, this accomplice of Alec Guinness's has
Pendlebury.
Pendlebury has stolen a painting, decides not to press charges, leaves, and the cops just let him go.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, like nowadays, at least in the US, like the perception is that would never happen.
Yeah, you'd be in jail.
But I've received mercy from cops before.
Really?
Yeah. Just coming up back to New York from Virginia, I was pulled over for having a expired registration.
Yeah.
Because the lockdowns and all that. And the cop was super nice, He said, you should have just stayed in Virginia. Taxes are too high in New York. He's like, I'm not going to write you a ticket. You can spend that money on taxes.
Yeah, I've had bad experiences with cops.
This was in Jersey, by the way.
Yeah.
So that'll tell you something.
I've had bad experiences and good experiences with cops, and I remember, my first time getting pulled over as a kid, rushing to band practice, being late and driving recklessly over the speed limit to our high school. I don't know if I was in the school zone or not, but I was reckless driving technically, and he took it down to be not reckless.
My first time getting pulled over, I was going 42 and a 25 outside of our high school, rushing to get a GameCube controller because we were one GameCube controller short at someone's house. The cop gave me a big fat ticket, and I had to go to driver's ed again to take a class. So it was really not a great experience.
You should have been a British cop.
If he was a British cop, he would have let me off.
Bashed you with his bobby stick.
Something this movie does, and I'm not that educated in the world of heist movies, but I'd never watched a black and white heist movie before, so this might be the first one. But a couple things.
Except Ocean's 11.
Except Ocean's 11. But actually, I don't think was that black and white.
No. The original is not black and white.
It was from the 60s, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
What year is this movie from?
51.
Yeah, I think this is the oldest heist movie. Actually, I've seen the original Italian Job. I don't know when that came out. Another British crime movie.
Oh, interesting.
This movie, for me at least, I was like, oh, this is where they get heist plots from. This is where they get all the tropes, right? The main guy with a legitimate grudge, forming a crew, planning it out, executing the plan, something goes wrong, and then it all works out in the end. Obviously, here it doesn't work out. This movie also has a great chase sequence.
It does.
Which is hilarious.
Yeah.
And a lot of movies have, Fast and Furious movies there's just 2 hours of chase sequences.
Yeah, that's a good point. It has these great chase sequences.
It has at least one at the end that's like a 20-minute chase sequence with at least like 50 cops chasing him through a cop museum. Anyway, it's just, so this movie also had the chase sequence, which is great. And then it also just has cool criminals, like the two career criminals are objectively cool.
Yeah.
Maybe British people watch the movie and think they're stupid.
No, they're definitely cool.
But they're cool guys. Yeah. I think the other guy's name is Lackney. I think it's Shorty and Lackey or Lackney. Just very cool names. And if you watch a Guy Ritchie movie now, it's entirely fun nicknames.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Like Gorgeous George.
Let's talk about that chase scene.
Yes.
It's a great scene. So, let's say you're watching a show or a movie where clearly the criminal is portrayed as bad, and the upshot is that you don't like them. But in the moment in these chase scenes, the way that it's shot, it's from their perspective. So you always find yourself rooting for them. Again, because if it's from their perspective, that's how you're going to feel. I don't think that's necessarily an intrinsically bad thing, but it is something that makes you wonder. In the more slow scenes, I might be rooting for justice, but in this chase scene, I'm every time that he pulls one over the cops, and gets them to chase the wrong car, I'm like, oh yes, So it's just it's out of your control that you feel that way.
This movie also does a good job though with they're robbing from is it the Bank of England or is it a bank?
It's some bank.
So like they're hurting the everyman as opposed to modern heist movies where they're usually only hurting like a billionaire or 100 millionaire.
Yeah.
Right? They're hurting the owner of a casino versus here where they're hurting all the members of a bank. So it makes it you're right. In the chase sequences, we're rooting for Alec Guinness.
Yeah. But, at the same time, like the bank is clearly portrayed in the film as this sort of bureaucratic behemoth. When he's being celebrated, his boss takes him to the chief cashier, who takes him to the deputy chairman, who then takes him to the chairman and the board of directors. And so you get this impression of, okay, if they're not robbing this villainous, billionaire, they're robbing a sort of inhuman bureaucratic institution.
It's made clear that they are hurting like the English economy by doing this or whatever, but yeah.
Well, it's made clear that politicians care, but I don't know that it's made clear in the film itself that anybody's going to feel the brunt of this.
Right.
I mean, politicians are upset about it. The cops are upset about it.
Right. Of course, you're also laughing at these characters when they're running down the Eiffel Tower and getting, their stuff taken by these girls.
I got angry at the girls.
Yeah.
When the one British schoolgirl would not give them the Eiffel Tower, I was like, just take it. Just take the Eiffel Tower and run. I was fully on board with them at that point. I also, after watching this movie, had dreams where I robbed someone and then felt guilty afterwards.
Yeah.
Like I had Catholic guilt after robbing someone.
During the dream or after you woke up?
No, during the dream. I was actually robbing a bank with a friend of ours from high school. And I think, it was a museum. And as soon as we left the museum, our friend was cheering. And I was like, I've just committed a serious sin. I need to return this.
I've had dreams where I committed crimes and then felt really bad in the dream.
Yeah.
I also had a dream. The only robbery dream I can think of is when I stole some bananas from a grocery store. Like I was looking for good bananas. I can never find them in New York. And I finally found good bananas and I stole them.
Yeah.
And I think I got arrested. I forget.
Yeah. It's just in my head. I don't know who could plan a crime for this long and not feel the guilt,
What happened to all the money? That's my question. Did the two career criminals who helped them end up getting ripped off? Because clearly that was his plan.
Yeah.
When they end up going to Paris.
Yeah. They probably got ripped off. The gold probably got reclaimed by the Brits, It was traced to France, and France probably helped them to get it back.
He ends up with 25,000 pounds that he becomes a big man in
Rio de Janeiro.
Rio,
yeah.
Paying off all sorts of different people and donating to things.
And Audrey Hepburn is his girlfriend.
Amazing.
Chiquita.
Her character, Chiquita. It's her character's name.
Amazing.
She's in the movie for 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And so it's so brief that my wife and I were both like, is that Audrey Hepburn? And we Googled it immediately, and it was Audrey Hepburn.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Not because it looked just like her, but we're like, how could she only be in a movie for 10 seconds?
Hey, it's Alec Guinness.
That's true. He's the Audrey Hepburn of England.
There's another actor who made his film debut in this film, and I'm not sure that I found him in the scene, but it's Robert Shaw
from Jaws,
who played Henry VIII in A Man for All Seasons,
and Henry VIII in Jaws,
and Quint and Henry VIII, who's the shark, name of the shark in Jaws.
He played Jaws
Quint.
in Jaws.
He played Quint in Jaws, and he has a very small role as a police lab technician. So it would be probably either at the police college. Or in the montage where it shows them investigating.
I wanted to close this conversation out by looping it back to this question of resentment and despair and like the emptiness that's found in a materialistic or consumeristic culture that only cares about wealth or honors or pleasure, and how that is particularly felt among artists. I kept on watching this film. I kept finding myself going back to Pendlebury, who, he's not the one who came up with this scheme. He's not the one who for years has been plotting it, but he does end up getting caught up in this with Dutch. And, it's only able to sort of come out of his previous rejection of his dreams of, I don't know, I forget how he puts it, of being surrounded by rare and beautiful things. I think he uses the phrase an idle dream at one point. And he also quotes, I forget the poet, but he says, of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these, it might have been.
Bean.
Yeah.
That's my favorite part is that bean does not rhyme with pen in British.
It doesn't rhyme with pen in Americanish either.
It doesn't?
Bin and pen.
Much closer though.
Sure. But in any case, it
might have been.
I think that there is really something to be edified by in watching this film and to contemplate is what we do with our dreams. In the case of the character of Dutch, his dream is attached to something that's so obviously unworthy of holding the status of a dream or a life ambition. But in the case of Pendlebury, he's forsaken his dreams and has instead settled for something obviously beneath that to which he was called as an artist.
Or maybe he hasn't forsaken his dreams, but he's not comfortable with the fact that he can make his art in his spare time. You know what I mean? Because he's still making art.
Yeah, but he despises it,
No, but I'm talking about the stuff that he does in his spare time that he brings to the apartment building.
Right.
But I'm saying he's still doing that. So it also might be like accepting that just because you don't make your living at something doesn't mean that it's not valid.
Right.
Or like it's not.
Sure.
Have dignity.
Either way, I think that there is this kind of terrible responsibility we have to maintenance our dreams, to attend to them, to ensure that the things that we are dreaming about and toward which we are aspiring are worthy of that, but at the same time, that they're not things that we're discounting or abandoning, because God really does lead us on by means of these deeply felt urgencies of the heart, and when they're neglected, it's like we are able to do untold evil things.
Right. Yeah, I know a lot of our would-be artists who think that like the world owes them something.
Right.
That their dreams are there to be like served by the world instead of like to serve the world.
Yeah.
I know that some of the people out there burning stuff down are people who think that they're writers or like
improvisers. It's a lot of
improv comedians.
It's a lot of former Herald Night members. Yeah.
Some people are owed things by society, but there's a lot of people who think they're owed
artistic success.
Yeah, the money and funding to live their dream or something.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people with crummy dreams, base and perverse dreams. And if all that I have to look forward to is a life hedonistically enjoyed, well, then, a pandemic is going to be a real obstacle to that. An economy in recession is going to be a huge obstacle to that. And like people with moral codes or who rightfully object to my behavior are also going to be a huge obstacle to that. And so that's going to cast me invariably into a kind of panic and a need to,
rob a bank of gold bullions,
or a Target, or a Macy's, or a Portland mayor's residence. I don't know.
Whatever happened to Chaz/Chop? Does that still exist? I don't remember. Did that get shut down finally?
I think it did. Yeah, I think finally after someone got killed.
I think they're part of the UN now. Really quick, what do you guys think of the framing of the movie? How it's all a story that he's telling a guy who arrested him.
I wanted to ask, did you guys guess that he was...
I did not.
No, neither did I.
I was surprised. I was shocked.
I was shocked when they stood up and the handcuff.
Yeah, I like that little twist.
Well, what did you think of the framing?
I really enjoyed it.
I did too. Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I think at the time it was probably equivalent to the twist at the end of The Sixth Sense for people. He's been arrested the whole time.
Yeah, well, I liked that. We begin in South America and there's this exotic vibe.
You think he got away with it.
Yeah, totally.
The whole movie, you're like, he's going to get away with it. Yeah.
And I also like how, this is just like a film device you see all the time, but I liked how when he was running into the subway at the end to escape the police, you already started hearing that South American music again before it cuts back to Rio.
One more thing I'll say about the movie is I like movies that that have this. What's that Joaquin Phoenix movie that came out on Prime where he's like, it's like he's saving a girl? You were never really there. Like movies that show practical ways to get away with heinous things. Like in that movie with Joaquin Phoenix, he buys a hammer in a store and kills people with a hammer. Not that I would ever do that, but it's like, oh, anyone could get away with that. And this movie shows how easy it would be to rob a bank. Obviously, it's for that time period, but I'm sure there's practical ways to rob a bank now that don't involve, hundreds of thousands of dollars of planning and research and basically Ocean's 11 level planning. Because this didn't. This was a practical heist, and it worked really well. Yeah. And it was their own stupidity and the French that ruined it for them.
But also an artist caught up in another artist's work. He gets distracted looking at this other artist's work.
Oh, yeah.
And then absentmindedly wanders off with it. So I think that this, again, sort of provides further evidence to my thematic analysis of this sort of failed, resentful artist just messing everything up for everyone.
Okay, well, thank you, Paul, for discussing this film with us. It was delightful.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul.
I didn't want to be here, and they tied me to a chair to force me onto this podcast. So really happy to be here. Thanks, guys. This was a blast.
You better say that.
You bet.
You bet.
Yeah, so our next film is going to be Dekalog 3, and we're going to have our recurring guest, Nathan.
Well, this will have been the first time he's recurred.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. This will be his first recurrence. Filmmaker Nathan Douglas from Vancouver will be joining us to talk about Dekalog Part 3. Yeah, so that'll be in a couple weeks from now. And you can always join our group at facebook.com/groups/CatholicPods and hang out there for a bit. To grasp someone, to inform on someone, to rat someone out. Originated with the 19th century phrase to shop on someone. That gave us the noun shopper, which became grasshopper, and then got shortened to grass.
What is cockney? Is cockney, is cocky, is cock an area? Cockland, England? What is cockney? Is cockney a part of London?